We're continuing with the Mamorim that the Rebbe said 40 years ago. And as we've stated, when something is 40 years old, it has a special effect and aura, because at that time we can actually get it, so to speak. Like Moshe Rabbeinu at the end of the 40 years, after that long sojourn in the desert, he said, and now God has given you a heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear. So this mimer was said by the Rebbe on Shabbos Parshas Shemini, the 20th of Adar, Sheni Tavshin Memdalad. Just a short note, because the Rebbe will mention here about the Kviyus. The 20th of Adar this year is the Adar Sheni is going to be this coming Shabbos, but it's going to be Parshas Tzav, not Parshas Shmini. So we're not going to get into a class on why and how the Parshas can change and how that can work out. Okay, so that year was Parshas Shmini. It was actually a leap year 40 years ago too, Tavshin Daled Mem. Vayidaber Havaya El Meisha Bel Aaron Leimer Zos Chukas Atera Shetziva Havaya Goimer. So the special Torah portion that we read on this Shabbos is Shabbos Parshas Parah, which is a reference, of course, to the mitzvah of the red heifer. And it's a reference to the red heifer, So, the command is in the Torah, and God spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, saying, this is the statute, the chukah of the Torah, which God commanded, etc., and they shall take to you a red heifer which is complete. And we know how our Rabbeim, they also taught and they deduced from this, starting from the Alter Rebbe and the Likutei Torah, and the subsequent Mamorim Adle Dibra Maschel Zeh, the Shabbos Parshas Parah Tov Reish Ayin Ches, until also the Maimer, which also begins with this verse from the Torah that was said in 1918, in 5678, by the Rebbe Rashab, by the fifth Rebbe. And also in the Mamorim of the Rebbe's Rebbe and father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the prince of our generation. We have to understand, why does this verse say that God, number one, speaks to Moshe and to Aaron, and then he says this is the statute of Torah that God commanded? Why do you have to mention God twice? We know already who is speaking. So it should just say, and God spoke to Moshe saying, this is the statute of the Torah. We know already this is that I'm commanding. So why does it mention God twice? We also have to understand why, when they performed the procedure of the offering of the red heifer, it had to be done outside of the camp, specifically, and it had to be performed not by the high priest, but by one of the kohanim. And skan is usually a reference to the second in command, the vice kohen gadol. But I believe it's kosher with another kohen. It's performed by another kohen. The kohen later would become impure in this procedure. Why is this parsha, this portion of Parah Aduma, is called the statute of the Torah? It should really just be one of the statutes in the Torah. The Torah has several. And from this it seems that this is the one and only, or the special statute of the Torah, of the whole entire Torah. The mitzvahs in the Torah are generally divided into three categories. They're divided into testimonial and statutes and laws. Like the Rebbe's Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, explains at length, actually, in his Mamorim in the year of 1940, 5700, and the Rebbe adds, and that year the calendar lined up like this year too, like the year of the recitation of this Maimer, 1984, and subsequently it's also like this year, 2024, 5784. The mishpatim hema mitzvahs muvonis b'seichel enushi. The laws are the mitzvahs that you would understand just with your regular intellect. It makes sense. It makes sense that you shouldn't steal, that you have to have law and order, that you have to have a just system, that you have to be charitable, etc. So that's that category of mitzvahs. And the statutes, the chukim, they're decrees from above, from the supernal one, and they're from the decrees from God, and they're higher than any understanding because He just said so. For instance, first of all, the red heifer, but things like you can't mix wool and linen or certain. Now people have come along with reasoning, and we're supposed to look into why maybe it would make sense. But these are things that we wouldn't have necessarily come up with on our own. Many of the laws of ritual purity and impurity are considered chukim. They're just the way God decreed it to be. And other laws, the laws of what's kosher, what's not kosher. That's because God said so. And that's it. The eidos hein mitzvahs hameidis al devarim shahayu. And the category of mitzvahs called eidos are testimonial mitzvahs. They testify and they recall things that happened. So, for instance, we eat matzah and it recalls the Exodus, etc. And here we would understand that the statute of the whole Torah is the mitzvah of the red heifer. But we've got to understand what's it all about. The Mamorim, the Hassidic discourses also bring the medrash that says the Chukas HaPesach v'Chukas Parah Aduma Daim Zelazeh. The Paschal offering, the Passover offering, which and the red heifer offering have similarities. They're similar to each other. They have the same wording. Zos Chukas HaPesach. This is the statute of the Passover offering. And then it says this is the statute of the red heifer. So therefore the wording is the same, so there has to be a similarity. So the Medrash says that they have similarities. And you don't know which one is a greater statute than the other. And then the Medrash continues by saying, and the parable that the Medrash brings is two matrons that looked very similar, and they were walking together, and from a distance you can't tell them apart. You can't tell which one is which. And what does it mean that they're similar? They are similar to each other, one to the other. And the Rebbe here adds another detail that is brought elsewhere regarding the special portions that are read in the season of Purim and Pesach. We have what's called the four Parshias. There's an additional Torah is taken out. And in the first one we read the portion of the Shkolim, the mitzvah of the Shkolim that have to be brought every year. The second one is Zohar, to remember Amalek. The third one is Parshas Parah, a portion of the red heifer, getting ready for Pesach to recall the purification process. And the fourth one is HaChodesh, that tells us to actually bring the Korban Pesach and the Passover one. So now there's always 5 Shabbosim, and sometimes even 6 Shabbosim in this time period. So there has to be at least one slot when there's not a special Torah reading like this 2 weeks in a row. So, for instance, this year we had Shkolim, and then we didn't have a special one, and then we had Zohar. So the one between Shkolim and Zohar, that was called the Shabbos Hafsokah, the Shabbos which had the interruption. And sometimes, if Purim would be if Purim would be at the end of the week, it could happen that after Purim there shouldn't be, if Purim is Friday, then there would be no special Shabbos right after Purim, but it would be the next 2 Shabbosim. But here the Rebbe points out that the sages tell us, but the Parah and a Chodesh are always 2 weeks in a row. In other words, there's never the separation between Parah and a Chodesh. You could have the separation between Zohar and Parah. You could have the separation between Shkolim and Zohar. And I believe you could even have it between twice. But you cannot have ever the separation between Parah and HaChodesh. Shehi Pashas Chukas HaPesach, and this further illustrates the similarity because the Parshas HaChodesh, the fourth one, we read of the statute of bringing the Passover offering. So we said the offering of the red heifer is a chukah, and the offering of Pesach is a chukah, and that they're like similar. We don't know which one is which. So the Rebbe says this further illustrates you can't divide them. You can't have a Shabbos in between that doesn't have it. You have to have them 2 Shabbosim in a row. The Gamizeh move on Sheyesh Shaychus B'neiim, and the Rebbe points out that this further illustrates the connection between the two, between Parah and the statute of the red heifer and the statute of the Korban Pesach. So to understand this, we have to have as by way of introduction what it says regarding Adam, the first human being. The Torah, when it tells us the story, it says, "Vaynicheyu b'gan Eden, lavdo l'shomro." God placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. V'amar Azal, and the sages teach us, when it says that he put him in the garden to work it, to do, that's the 248 positive commandments. And to guard it, to watch it, to keep it, that's the 365 negative commandments, the things that we're not supposed to do. The purpose for a person on this earth is to serve God in these two ways: in the positive commands, to do what you're supposed to, and to abstain from what you're not supposed to do. Shur meirav asay tov, veer away from the evil and do good, like it says in Tehillim. U'mavur betanya dezeu mashomer azal amechi v'leyilecha mipirei gvura shmainum. Like the Tanya says, quoting the sages, that the first 2 commandments are what we heard directly from God. The subsequent commandments we heard from Moshe Rabbeinu, right? We didn't want to hear. We said Moses quotes us as saying "Daber atoim." We heard enough from God directly, but what did we hear from God? The first 2, that I am God, your God. You shall have no other before me. So, what's the reason for this? But that really included the whole Torah, because the first commandment of I am the Lord your God, that includes all the positive commandments. And the second commandments, that you shouldn't have any God beside me, that includes all the negative commandments. This serving of God has to be in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Gan Eden, well, what is the Garden of Eden? So, it's also sometimes known as paradise. It's also referred to as the place where God placed Adam. It's also a utopian place, as it was at that time, and that he was banished, as we'll see. But it's also a spiritual place. It's also something very special. It's where things are very, very good. It's the Garden of Eden. So this has to be in the Garden of Eden. V'gav shegan Eden hu bebechina elgeina yesem ha'elam. And if that's the case, this Garden of Eden is higher than what the world is about. This is unworldly, or higher than worldly. And like the Rebbe says, like we know the difference, at least in general, between Gan Eden and the world. In Gan Eden, at that level, we have the grasp of the makeup of God. In the world, we only know that God exists, but we can't understand the makeup of God, what God is. We're only able to know about God and to know that God exists, but we can't exactly know what He's about. But when you're more sensitive in the higher realms, then people could grasp exactly what God is. In addition, in Gan Eden, everything is revealed. Here in the world, everything is hidden. And that's what we've mentioned. The word for world is olam. Olam comes from the term helam, which means hidden. So, as the scale of worlds gets lower and lower, less and less is able to be perceived and known. And for that reason, the Gan Eden is not able to even handle anything which is contrary or oppositional to God. What happened when there was something that wasn't correct, right, with Adam and Eve in that particular part of the story? He banished man. And in other words, they were kicked out of Gan Eden after they committed the sin. So if this Gan Eden place is so special, then why did Adam and Eve have to work it and guard it? If it's so special and so high and lofty, that's a place where you could see and perceive godliness, then why did they have to do anything? They should have just basked in its glory and not have anything to do. So the Rebbe says that no, nevertheless, there would be something increased in Gan Eden through what the person will do. There will be input of the L'Shomra, what we'll do and what we'll keep. So now, breaking that down a little bit, the level of Gan in terms of creation is already the second world, the world of Bria. There are 4 worlds, to just be brief, a brief review. Atzilus is the highest world. And as the Rebbe will say here, it's a world of Achdus. It's so close to God that on that level, it appears more like God than like a world. Bria, on the other hand, is the first world that, although it's very lofty, and although God is able to be perceived in some of the loftiest realms, but nevertheless, it's called the world of creation, Bria. Then it goes Yetzira, formation, Asiya, action. And we're in each one of these worlds are also split into another, each one of the 4 worlds within the 4 worlds, and then many other levels in between, as is taught in Kabbalah and Chassidus. So garden is a reference to the world of Bria. The Eden, and then now Eden, Koyal Elam Atzilus. That already goes on the highest world, the world of Atzilus. Atzilus is Eitzel. It's close. It's basically the first expression of God that there will even be a world. Umikol Mokoin Hine Gam Elam Atzilus Nikra B'Shem Elam. Nevertheless, it's not just called Atzilus, it's called Olam Atzilus, because it's not the essence of God. It is already God expressing that there should be a world. So, although it's prior to the nitty-gritty of the creation, and therefore it's still God within himself, but it's already God relating to the idea that there should be a world which is seemingly something that if you don't look close enough, it appears to be not necessarily godly. And once this is in the process, so although it's the beginning of the process and there hasn't been the full creation yet, nevertheless, it's already in relation to God himself, which God in his essence is, there's no world, there's nothing else, so that's already called Olam HaTzilus. It's already considered a world. V'yesh b'yes Sfiras. And there are already the 10 spheres, the 10 levels, the 3 intellectual and the 7 attributes, the emotional. Esav l'teishav l'yad aleph, and 10, specifically 10, not 9 and not 11. V'af shu elam ha'achdus hine hu nikra gam b'shem elam v'tzorich lahamshich bo b'china el gena yeser. And since it's already a world, we can already bring into it more godliness. Godliness can be increased even even on that level. There could be this law of the L'Shomra. And the Rebbe is sharing that with us. We have work to do. Shalamayla midaga the Elam, and therefore you could elevate it back to where it is, where it's higher than even being a world. Hainu b'chinas, but how could you do that? Drawing from Olam Yisrael Sof Shalamayla Me'elam Atzilus, from the levels of the worlds, and even though these are called worlds, good question. Olam is Ein Sof. They're still called worlds, but it's infinite there. So what does it mean on that level? So there's Atzmus, the essence of God. And then there's God's infiniteness, so therefore, if it's infinite, whatever it is, for lack of another description, it's already Olamis. But those are higher than Atzilus, so you could draw from that, and that could also give energy into the world of Atzilus. And the Geras HaKodesh, the Alter Rebbe does discuss the reason why they are called Almin if they're so lofty and high and infinite. And that's the idea, to draw down the actual essence of God into these worlds. The Zehu, and that's why God, when he speaks about the plan, it says, Vayita Havai Elikim Gan Be'eden Mikedem. First of all, it says God created a garden in Eden, and then it says Mikedem. Now, Mikedem, this word Kedem, is also a very special word, and it implies prior from what's before, what's higher, east, the first place to where the sun comes to rise in the east, so it's Kedma, but it means something which is even earlier. In other words, something which is authentic and as high as deep as you can go. So God created a garden elsewhere. This is a long discussion, which is not really for here. And afterwards it says that God planted this garden. It says he placed the person, the human being, in the garden to work it and to keep it, to guard it. Even though the Garden of Eden on its own is a very lofty level, it was made by being planted by God and all his an element of God, God's name Havaya and God's name Elikim. Nevertheless, there has to be the increase which is done through serving, through working it by the performance of the 248 positive mitzvahs, and by guarding it, by abstaining from the 365 prohibitions. We're able to draw down more godliness into this world more than it would have had in and of itself, albeit being planted by God Himself. But God made it that we should be able to increase and draw in more godliness. And all this was even before the first sin of eating from the tree of knowledge. Shegam Oz, so now this was before the sin, before evil was in the world. Shegam Oz even then, if they would have kept it, they would have also brought and drawn down more godliness through working and guarding it. Omnom, after the sin of the eating from the tree of knowledge, and the subsequent degradation, shall we say, they were downgraded, right? They were banished from Gan Eden, and the world had evil enter the world, etc. So this was a descension that happened through the sin. By Goresh Adam, and God banished the mankind from there. So then, if that happened, then they're even able to draw down a greater light than they could have drawn before that sin was committed. How ironic is that? And this is something which the Rebbe discussed on several occasions. The idea, the different levels of sin, and the different levels that happened, and like has been mentioned, that God Himself does tshuva for diminishing the moon, because that was already a level of the change, the transformation of creation the way it was. So every dissension is for the purpose of the ascension that follows it. From this we know that the descending out of Gan Eden is also for the purpose of the ascension that will follow. So that they'll be able to draw down this higher energy and light through working and guarding, through the performance of the mitzvahs. And through this, completing the original purpose and goal of the creation, to make a dwelling place for God. So now we can start understanding, why did the red heifer have to be done not in the holy temple, but outside of the camp? Because that's even a lower place. It's not as holy as the place of the temple. Because the ultimate purpose of creation is that God should dwell in a place where it is the lowest. So the same world that can have terrible atrocity and ugly things has then the same place where we perform mitzvahs, we have the greatest holiness. So therefore the red heifer had to be offered out of the camp. V'gam shal yada hitaras tumas meis, and through this process, there's the purification of those that became impure by encountering a corpse. Avi avaisatuma, which is, so to speak, the highest level of impurity. Avi avaisatuma, the father of the father, because there are different levels of impurity. V'gam beprati is, and a little bit more in detail, this serving and the service of the red heifer also comes with these two ideas: to serve and to guard, to do and to abstain. The burning of the heifer, that's the elevation, shor veering away from what has to be abstained from, veering away from the evil. Then the ashes of the red heifer were placed into pure water that was drawn. So that water, that living water, that is the idea of drawing down, of doing, of the positive, drawing forth, asay toiv, doing good. And this also is illustrated by how this had to be done. This comes from the depths. The wellspring comes from the depths of the ground, the lowest part. So that also illustrates, serving God with the lowest. This is also what we find in the Medrash. The red heifer alludes to and hints at the four exiles. Dal Hamalchis and Ikrois al Shem Mitzrayim al Shem Shehem Mitzirim Yisrael. They are the four kingdoms that exiled us and anguished us in exile, and they're all called by the name of the first one, which was Egypt, Mitzrayim. The word Mitzrayim, usually we say it's like comes from the term of Meitzar, or Gvul, boundary, but here it's from like Mitzirim, like Metzayer, causes anguish and pain to Israel, to Yisrael. The whole idea in exile is that we are then serving God in the lowest place possible. And therefore it was done by the second Kohen, by the vice Kohen, that was the son of Aaron, Elazar. Like it says in the Medrash, the name Elazar, Elazar who Kael Oizer, the God helps, El Oizer, God is helpful. The name itself illustrates that God helps everybody. Because in order to succeed in the lowest place, you need help and assistance from above. Which reminds me of a vort that we saw from the Rebbe's father last year Pesach time, that it says, in the Haggadah we read about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and that he said that how do you survive? He says, right? The whole, we say this in the Haggadah, and in as a extra lesson, who's the one who said this? That Kol Yemecha Yechalav L'Moisa Mashiach, right? Yemecha Yecha Yomim Kol Yemecha Yechalav L'Moisa Mashiach, and that we're going to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim and the focus on leaving exile, etc. So the Rebbe's father points out that both these names, Elazar and Azariah, illustrate the help of God in different aspects. This name Elazar and Azariah. And here you see the Rebbe, he says this, a little bit of this word. Here it's a Medrash, Mufareshus, and there it's both names, Azariah, help of God. Additionally, it's interesting, we started today the new cycle of the Rambam, and when the Rambam goes through the generations, so I'm sure this is expounded upon, this is not the place, but just to mention it, it's Elazar is in the chain of the 40 generations. His brother Isamar, I believe, was also present, is not mentioned there by the Rambam in that spot. So just some food for thought. Musings. Okay, let's continue. V'hinei al pi anal yuvan mashenikra Parah b'shem Chukas HaTorah. So according to all of this, we can understand now why is this red heifer called the statute of the Torah. Hainishi Chukas HaTorah Kula. This is the statute that all the other statutes, so to speak, are named for. Kikashem Shapora. They're not really named for it, but this is the one. This is the poster child or the poster cow for statutes. Kikashem Shapora Dumanasis Bechutz, just like the red heifer was done outside of the camp. He in Shel Chukah, and that's a statute. And when there's a statute, the sages tell us, And Rashi brings it in the Parsha. You can't. This is Zera Gezarti. It's the decree of God, and you can't even. This is it. This is how I want it. Forget about why, what. This is it. This is how it works. That's how it is in the whole Torah. What happened? God lusted to have a dwelling place in the lowest realms. Till this very, very low world, there's no world lower than it. Like we learned in the Tanya last week. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Kipirish Admur Azokn. So for these statutes that are higher than our pay grade, that are higher than our understanding, that are higher than reason, Nisave, God wanted, He lusted. The whole point is that we make a dwelling place in down here in this low world, and where it doesn't even make sense. Not in the higher worlds, which are spiritual worlds, where there things make sense. There they know everything, and that's not where God wants it done. Specifically, it has to be done in the physical, material world. This idea in Torah shetachlisi laslis borach dirib tachtenim davke hoya begoli gam beis matan Torah. Now, this idea that God wanted to make a dwelling place in this low world, this was in a revealed sense when the Torah was given. Uchidua shematan Torah lehelu es Yisrael neshamas begufim lamayla ela hoya beyered Hashem al Har Sinai. Now, God could have made a process when it came time to give the Torah. He could have taken all the 600,000 souls and all the 3 million people there and elevated us all up to some supernal realm, heavenly realm, given us the Torah and brought us back down. That's not what happened. It says, Vayedet Hashem al Har Sinai, God Himself went down. Betachtenim davke, He came down to this world. The Yisrael came, v'yisyatzu usachti sohar davke. More than that, where were the people? Under the mountain, at the foot of the mountain, at the bottom part of the mountain specifically. They didn't have to all climb up. They weren't even allowed to climb up. They had to stay down. And specifically there was the great revelation where God said, I am the Lord your God. Like the word Anochi, which means I, which is an acronym for I have given my soul to you in writing. The Torah, in other words. The Chukas. Now we can understand the connection to the statute of the Torah, meaning the red heifer, to the offering of Pesach. Is the Yetzias Mitzrayim. The giving of the Torah was the purpose of the Exodus. God told Moses when He met him at Mount Sinai, He said, "You'll take them out, and you'll take them out so they serve me at this mountain." The whole purpose of leaving was to become the servants of God. So now the Rebbe continues, and he says that for this reason, also when we recall the Exodus from Egypt, and we delve deeper into the idea of the Exodus and serving God with the Pesach ideas and the Pesach lessons, there also we have both things. This idea of to serve and to guard and keep, to abstain. And like it says, the sages tell us on the verse, and this is actually in Parshas Boy, Mishchul Chulachem Tzoim. The verse tells us that you shall draw and take a lamb, a sheep. So the sages say, what does this mean to draw? Mishchu yedechem me'avodah zara. Draw away your hands from idol worship. Ukchu lachem mitzvahs, and take for yourself mitzvahs. So negate, abstain from the negative, what's not supposed to be done, from transgression, from idol worship, and take and do and perform the mitzvah. It's l'shamar l'avda, but it's the other order, but it has both. Albeit, now the Rebbe finishes up here. Well, actually, a little bit more. What does this mean in dollars and cents? What is the explanation of these two methods of serving God, and these two ways of the red heifer and the idea of serving and guarding in our day-to-day service? Hine, and specifically from the offering of the red heifer. The heifer had to be burned to the extent that the only thing left was ashes. And like the Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaKodesh, that the idea of ashes, and here he's talking about when Abraham said, "And I am but dust and ashes." Remember, some of these concepts we had in the previous Mamorim, because the Rebbe would, even though it's not an official continuum, but the Rebbe built on what he taught earlier. The Efer Umashanisha Rak Yisoid HaOfer Mikol Dal HaYisoidis. When everything is made from the four elements of water and earth and wind, gas, and fire, right? So when the other element, the three elements are all gone, the only thing that's left is a bit of the element of earth, which is the ashes. So after, when something is burned, the other ones are gone. The Efer Mashanisha Rak Yisei the Offer Mikol Dal Yisei. That's the essence of what it is. So what is that in our service? One submits oneself to the extent that they only have left their essence. All the other stuff we get rid of. The idea of the bittul, subservience, nullification, is submission. We give ourselves in, and that we only just have what is our real soul, main purpose and goal. I am created to serve my Creator, my Master. To stand and to serve God. Now, in the procedure of offering the red heifer, the dust, the ashes, was placed in the water, and it was floating on the water that was in the vessel. After the submission and the subservience and the veering away from the evil, he fulfills the ultimate of the purpose of his creation, to make a dwelling place for God in the lower world. Wow! The one that's totally devoted to serve the king himself is the king. Just everything that he does is for the king. So when he comes, they look at the king's servant to see if the king is there. Everything is done, but he is totally subservient. And that, since he's illustrating that he's ultimately the king, he is part of the king, then he's the king. The burning means that he nullifies all the negative things of the animal soul, till he just has the fact that he has one that lusts, but everything else is gone. He doesn't do what he's not supposed to do, and he doesn't enjoy it, and he doesn't, and then he transforms it into holiness, like this. He mixes it with the living water. Now that it says that through reading the Parsha of Parah in the Torah, this is, by the way, in this Fabrengen, there was a historical, that Rebbe explained more, something that he spoke about in Purim, the whole idea of the Kom Rabba of Shachler of Zeta. People have been learning about this more also. The idea of total devotion. We're not going to get into the lengthy thing here, but here's what the Rebbe says. When we read this parsha in the Torah, we're going to read this coming Shabbos, the second Torah that's taken out, the special portion that's read, which some say it's even also a Doraisa, biblically ordained that we have to hear it. Through that itself, we hasten the coming to the end of the goal line and the fulfillment of the purpose, the ultimate purpose of making God, may He be blessed, a dwelling place in this world. And it's in both ways, that Rebbe says. But in both ways, to do and to guard. And from reading, like we said earlier, reading the portion of the red heifer, we come to the reading of the next special portion, the portion of HaChodesh, which speaks about the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering. Parshas Pesach, Mamish, till we merit that speedily, very soon. She is gal efer apora shel meisha shehu kayim l'deides. And the Rambam actually brings this in a medrash that will merit that the dust, the ash of the red heifer that Moshe brought, which it says stays for all generations, will be revealed. And they used to mix a little bit from that into the subsequent 8 red heifers that were brought. It says the 10th one Mashiach will bring. Until we merit to have the truthful redemption through and Moshe and Aaron will be with us. Mashiach Yatzes HaPorah HaAsidis, and Mashiach will make the 10th Parah Aduma, and that says that in the Medrash, and the Rambam brings it lahalacha. Bebinya Beis Hamikdash Ashlichi, with the building of the third Beis Hamikdash v'Yikuyim Banu Masha Kosuv, and we will have the fulfillment of that which says in the Mishnah, the end of the tractate of Yom Ashreichem Yisrael Lifnei Miatam Mitarim Mi Mitar Eschem. Rejoice, be happy, O Israel. Before who do you purify yourself, and who purifies you? Avichem Shabashamayim, your Father in heaven. Vesrochatum Avim Min Haaretz. And we'll have the fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah, and that the spirit of impurity I will remove from this earth. B'mheir of Yameinu Mamish, speedily in our days, actually so. Chaim.